This video is going to go through some guides to completing some of the iXLs that were assigned in the factoring and quadratic functions sections in Algebra 2. So I'm just going to run briefly through these so you get an idea of what will be expected from you for each of these. So if we go to J1, which is factor out a monomial, we haven't talked about this a whole lot in class, but this is something you should have seen before. So you're given a term, or you're given a polynomial here. This is 3n cubed plus 9n, and it says factor out the greatest common factor, and if the greatest common factor is 1, you would just retype the polynomial. So that means if there's nothing you can take out, you would just retype what's there. So you want to look at numbers and letters. So the greatest number that I can divide both of these terms by is 3. And the greatest letter that I can take out is the lowest exponent, which would be an n to the first power. And then I'm going to open up my set of parentheses and write what's left once I divide each of these terms by the 3n. So the 3n cubed, the 3's are going to divide out, but I am only taking one of the n's away from the n cubed, so I'm still going to be left with an n squared. And then for the plus 9n, 9 divided by 3 is 3. And the n's divide out, so I'm left with n squared plus 3, and that's going to be my term. So that's going to be the same way that all of these work. Like, for example, for this one, 4 and 6, I can take out a 2, meaning I can divide them both by 2 without turning into fractions. M cubed and m squared, the lower exponent is m squared, so that's what I can take out. And then I'm left with 2m plus 3. So that would be the way that you would go through and do this section. You do want to make sure that when you remultiply, you get whatever you started with. I'm just going to skip here, make sure there's nothing more difficult that comes up. Okay, so this one, 9q cubed minus 2. Well, there's no number besides 1 that I can divide both of the numbers by, and only one of them has a letter. The greatest common factor is 1, so I would just retype 9q cubed and then minus 2. I do want to note in this section, if you do not use the correct variable, it will mark your answer wrong, so just be aware of that. Okay, so that's our first one. Going back now, looking at J3, this is factoring quadratics. So this one is going to be a lot of factoring whenever your leading coefficient is equal to 1. We have v squared minus 6v plus 8, so I'm going to have two sets of parentheses. The factors of positive 8 that add to make negative 6 are going to be negative 2 and negative 4. So I have v minus 2 and v minus 4. And again, with this one, if you don't use the correct variable, I believe it will mark it wrong. Okay, so now we get into one where it looks like the leading coefficient is not 1, but actually this has a greatest common factor, and I'm going to use my pen here to write that. So I have this 2j squared minus 46j plus 44, so I can actually take a 2 out of that, and then I'm left with j squared minus 23, writing with the mouse is not the easiest, minus 23j plus 22. So really, I'm just going to be factoring what is in here. So I'm just going to be factoring this. So it's not quite going to be as difficult to factor, but you do have to leave this 2 in your final answer. So I'm going to put the 2 out in front before I open up my set of parentheses. J squared minus 23j plus 22, factors of positive 22 that add to make a negative 23 are going to be negative 22 and negative 1. And that's how you would do that one. Okay, so let's get rid of this. This is another one that's an easy one, doesn't have a greatest common factor, but the greatest common factors are mixed in. Let's see if we can jump and get something. That one's about the same. Okay, so when you get towards the end here, you may see some that do not have a greatest common factor. So these would be the ones where you do have to factor whenever your a value is not equal to 1. So I know I'm going to have a 3z and a z. And then I just need to figure out what goes in those parentheses. So I'm looking for factors of 8. I am trying to make 11. If I can add the 8 and the 3, instead of multiplying them, that would give me the positive 11. So this is actually going to be 3 plus 8, and then z plus 1. So if I check this, I get a 3z plus 8z, and that's going to give me my 11z. So when you get up into the higher areas, you will have to do some of that. This is one, this does have a greatest common factor of 3. But even then, once you take out the 3, you're left with 3s squared minus 4s minus 7. So even with the greatest common factor out, you still have something that has a coefficient not 1 on the inside. So just be aware that that can happen whenever you're going through these. Okay, so going back now, that's going to be your explanation for J3. If we go back to the previous section, or where we were at before, and look at the K's, these are some ones that have to do with quadratics. So K2 is going to be different characteristics of quadratic functions. These are going to ask things like this one is axis of symmetry. You might have to find the y-intercept. You may have to find the vertex. It just depends on the question. So find the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is the x-coordinate of the vertex. So I would do my negative b over 2a, which would be my negative 1 over 2 times 1, so negative 1/2. Axis of symmetry is always equal to an equation. So this would be x equals negative 1/2. This one is finding the y-intercept. The y-intercept is the c value. There isn't one here, so the answer would be 0. This is another axis of symmetry. Let's jump and see if we get something different. Minimum value. If you remember, minimum value is going to be the y-coordinate of the vertex. So first for this one, you would do your negative b over 2a. And so that's going to be a double negative 2, so positive 2 over 2 times 1, which is going to equal 1. And then you would plug that 1 back in. So when I plug that 1 back in, I get 1 squared minus 2 times 1, so negative 1, plus 8 would be 7. So the minimum value would be 7. And then this one is going to have you find, you're not only finding the x-coordinate, but you also find the y-coordinate. So my negative b over 2a will be a 0, which means my x-coordinate is going to be 0. And when I plug in 0, I get back 5. So you just find both of those. Okay. Now, 5, you're actually going to be graphing your quadratic. Please make sure you read the directions for this one. It says plot the vertex and then plot another point on the parabola. So you can go back, notice it says you can erase your parabola by selecting the second point and placing it on top of the first. So there is a possible way to erase this. When you click on the graph, then it lets you could also click off on those points. So first thing we got to do is plot the vertex. Well, the b value here is 0, so negative b over 2a is 0. And when I plug it in, I get 0. And then I need to select another point. Well, if I plug in 1 here, 1 squared is 1 times 8 is 8, so 1, 8 would be my second one. Notice it makes the mirror point on the other side, and that's all you have to do for this one. I am going to skip a little bit because the first couple are all the same. This one is in vertex form, so my vertex is going to be a positive 4, 0, because the k value is 0, so positive 4, 0, and then I have to plug in some other value. So with this one, it's a good idea to plug in something that's close to where your vertex x is, so like maybe 5. So 5 minus 4 is 1, squared is still 1, times negative 6 is negative 6. So 5, negative 6 is there, and that's what this parabola would look like. So this section is all about graphing. The last one is going to be solving by factoring. So we're going to go back and revisit the factoring that we were doing before, but now you're actually going to type in solutions. Notice it says separate multiple solutions with commas. You do need to make sure that you write everything in simplest form. So if you have any fractions, you'll need to reduce those. So with this one, 13w squared minus 8w equals 0. This does have a greatest common factor of w. When I take that out, I get 13w minus 8. And that equals 0. And then I set each of these things equal to 0. So the w I would set equal to 0. So one of my solutions is 0. With this one, when I set it equal to 0, I get 13w equals 8. And then I would divide by the 13. So we divide by the 13 here as well. So we actually end up with two solutions, one of which is 0. The other one is a positive 8 over 13. And that's how you'd submit your work. So there's a lot, when you start out in the beginning of this, there's a lot of greatest common factor, and then you would go through and solve. If we skip the preview, then you get one like this, which is where you would have to do your two sets of parentheses. And then again, set each parenthesis equal to 0 and solve. So I hope this was useful to just kind of give you an idea walking through the different iXLs for this section. So reach out to me and ask me any questions that you have while you're working on this.